Before I share what happened to me, I want you to know that I was just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. I'm Sarah Thompson, a middle school English teacher from Portland, Oregon. Back in 2019, before everything changed, I was focused on my students, my family, and just getting through each day. I was married to my college sweetheart, Mark, had 2 beautiful children, and lived in a cozy suburban neighborhood. I believed in God back then, but I wouldn't say I was particularly spiritual. I attended church occasionally and prayed sometimes, usually when I needed something or when times were tough. But I didn't have that deep, personal connection I have now. It's funny how we think we understand faith until something happens that shows us how much deeper it can go. The day everything changed was a Friday afternoon in October 2019. I remember it so clearly because I had just finished grading a stack of creative writing assignments. The stories were particularly good that semester, and I felt that special kind of teacher's joy that comes from seeing your students excel. I had called Mark to tell him I was heading home, and we were planning to take the kids to their favorite pizza place to celebrate the start of fall break. The rain had just started, that typical Oregon drizzle we're all so used to. I remember watching the leaves create beautiful patterns on my windshield as they fell. I was driving down Morrison Street, just like I had thousands of times before. The light was green, and I was going through the intersection when my world literally turned upside down. A red truck ran the red light. I later learned that the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. He was a good man who had been working double shifts to support his family. It took me time, but I've long since forgiven him. The impact was devastating. I remember seeing a flash of red, and then there was this horrific sound of metal crushing metal. They told me later that my car flipped 3 times before coming to rest against a light pole. But here's where something extraordinary happened. The initial impact was painful, yes, but then everything changed. It was like someone had suddenly switched everything to slow motion. I felt myself being lifted up, out of my body, out of the chaos below. I could see my blue Honda crushed against the pole, steam rising from the hood. People were running toward the car, phones in hand, calling for help. One woman, I'll never forget her, was wearing a bright yellow raincoat, and she was trying to reach through the broken window to check on me. I know how incredible this sounds, but I was completely aware, more aware than I've ever been. I could see everything with perfect clarity, the growing crowd of people, the rain falling through me, such a strange sensation, and my own body slumped over the steering wheel. But I wasn't scared. That's what surprised me the most. Instead, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace. I remember looking at my hands, not my physical hands, but my consciousness, I suppose, and I could see through them, but they were also more real than my physical hands had ever been. It's so hard to describe in earthly terms. Everything was both transparent and more solid at the same time. I could hear everything happening below, though at first, it was like listening through water. Then suddenly, everything became crystal clear. I heard someone shouting, "She's not breathing." Another person was counting for CPR. The sirens were getting closer, and I could hear the dispatch radio from a police car that had just arrived. But all these sounds, they didn't feel invasive or scary. They were just observations, like watching a movie where you know everything will be okay in the end. I felt drawn to my body at times, almost like a magnetic pole, but I also felt this growing awareness of something else, something bigger calling me. The physical scene below started to feel less and less relevant, like watching a distant memory rather than a current event. The most remarkable thing was the complete absence of pain. The moment I separated from my body, all pain vanished. Instead, there was this wonderful feeling of lightness and freedom. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack all your life, so heavy that you've forgotten it's there because it's just become part of you. Then suddenly, someone lifts it off. That's what it felt like, this incredible lightness of being. I watched the paramedics arrive. They were so focused, so professional. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, kept talking to my unconscious body, saying, "Stay with us, ma'am. Stay with us." I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I had never felt better, but of course, I couldn't. During these moments, my thinking felt completely different. It wasn't the usual linear way we think with words and sentences. It was more complete. I could understand things instantly and wholly. I thought about my family, but not with worry. Somehow I knew they would be okay. I thought about my students, and I could see how every interaction I'd had with them had created ripples of impact I'd never noticed before. But most notably, I began to feel this growing awareness of another dimension, something just beyond what I could see. It was like standing in a room and gradually becoming aware that there's another room beyond a thin curtain, and through that curtain, you could see the most beautiful light you've ever imagined. As I focused on that beautiful light beyond the curtain, something extraordinary began to happen. The scene of the accident below started to fade away, and I felt myself being drawn toward the light. It wasn't a harsh or blinding light like we know on Earth. It was alive, pulsing with love and warmth. The best way I can describe it is like seeing every color in existence all at once, including colors we don't have names for here. The transition was gentle, like being carried by a warm current. As I moved closer to the light, I began to hear the most beautiful music, not just with my ears, but with every part of my being. It was as if every note contained entire symphonies within it. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and it spoke of a love so deep and pure that it made me weep with joy. And then, I saw him. Words fail to describe what Jesus looks like, but I'll try my best to explain. He didn't appear exactly as the paintings show him. He was both familiar and completely different from anything I'd ever seen. His presence radiated pure love, not just emotional love, but love as a tangible force, like gravity or electricity. His eyes held the depth of all existence, and when he looked at me, I felt completely known and completely loved. He didn't speak with words, but his thoughts flowed into my mind with perfect clarity. The first thing he communicated was, "Sarah, my beloved child." In that moment, I understood what it truly means to be loved unconditionally. Every doubt, every fear, every mistake I'd ever made, they all dissolved in the presence of his perfect love. He showed me my life, but not in a linear way. I saw every moment simultaneously, like looking at a vast tapestry where every thread was connected to every other thread. I saw how the smallest acts of kindness I'd shown to my students had rippled out to affect not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. I saw moments where I thought I had failed, but those very failures had led to growth and understanding in ways I couldn't have imagined. But he also showed me the times I had missed opportunities to show love, the moments where fear or pride had held me back from doing what was right. Yet there was no condemnation in this showing, only a gentle understanding and an invitation to learn and grow. Every memory was bathed in his love, even the painful ones. Then Jesus took my hand, or what felt like my hand in this spiritual form, and suddenly we were moving through what I can only describe as the realms of heaven. The first thing that struck me was how real everything was. Our world, in comparison, feels like a shadow or a dim reflection. Every color was more vibrant, every sensation more vivid, every feeling more pure. I saw gardens that seemed to sing as we passed, flowers that danced with joy, and trees that radiated peace. The grass beneath us, though we weren't exactly walking in a physical sense, was alive with light, each blade containing worlds of beauty within it. The air itself was filled with love, you could breathe it in and feel it nourishing every part of your being. As we moved through this incredible place, I began to see others. Some were angels, beings of such beauty and power that it's almost impossible to describe them. They weren't the cute cherubs we see in artwork, they were magnificent creatures of light and purpose. Their very presence sang praises to God, not with voices but with their entire being. And then I saw her, my grandmother, who had passed away when I was in college. But she wasn't the frail woman I remembered from her last days in the hospital. She was radiant, young, and full of joy. She embraced me, and in that embrace, I felt every moment of love we had ever shared, multiplied 1,000-fold. We didn't need words, our communication was instant and complete. My grandmother showed me around what seemed to be her home in heaven, though home doesn't quite capture what it was. It was more like a space created from pure love and joy, reflecting everything that made her uniquely herself. The walls, if you could call them that, seemed to be made of living light, and every room held memories and love. As we moved through this space, I saw others I had known who had passed on, my childhood best friend who died in high school, my father's brother who I'd never met on earth but somehow instantly recognized, and even some of my former students who had left this world too soon. Each one was perfectly themselves, yet also more, as if they had become the fullest version of who they were always meant to be. But then Jesus gently indicated that there was something else I needed to see. The atmosphere changed, not abruptly, but gradually. The vibrant colors and overwhelming joy began to fade, and I felt a deep sadness emanating from him. I understood that he was about to show me something difficult but necessary. The beauty of heaven seemed to dim, and we entered what I can only describe as a realm of shadows. This wasn't hell in the traditional sense of fire and brimstone, it was something perhaps even more terrifying, a place of complete separation from love. I saw souls there, each trapped in their own isolation, surrounded by the consequences of their choices. What broke my heart the most was understanding that these souls had chosen this separation. Jesus showed me that this wasn't his desire for anyone. Each soul had repeatedly turned away from love, chosen darkness over light, until they had built their own prisons of isolation. I saw people I had known on earth, trapped in cycles of anger, bitterness, and regret. One soul in particular caught my attention, a former colleague who had lived a life focused entirely on material success, treating others as mere stepping stones to his goals. Here, in this realm of shadow, he was surrounded by all his achievements, but they were empty, meaningless. He kept trying to count his accomplishments, over and over, but finding no satisfaction, no peace. Jesus communicated to me that this realm wasn't permanent for all souls. Some would eventually choose to turn toward the light. But the longer they remained in darkness, the harder it became to recognize the light at all. His love reached out even here, but many had forgotten how to receive it. The pain in Jesus' heart was palpable. He showed me that every soul in this place was precious to him, that he had died for each one, hoping they would choose life and love. I understood then that what we call hell is not a punishment God creates, but rather the natural consequence of permanently rejecting love itself. This experience changed my understanding of both heaven and hell forever. I realized that every moment of our lives, we're making choices that either open us to love or close us off from it. Every small decision to show kindness, to forgive, to choose love over fear, these are what shape our eternal destiny. After seeing those souls in darkness, I felt Jesus gently turning my attention back toward the light. As we moved away from that realm of shadows, he began to show me something new, images of my family back on earth. I saw Mark sitting by my hospital bed, holding my hand, his eyes red from crying. I saw my children being brave for their father but scared and confused. I saw my students making get well cards, their young hearts full of hope and concern. Then Jesus showed me more. He revealed the purpose he had for my life, the lives I was meant to touch, the stories I was meant to share. It wasn't just about teaching English anymore, it was about teaching love, hope, and the reality of spiritual truths. He showed me how my experience, if I chose to share it, could help others understand the profound love he has for every soul. "It's not your time yet, Sarah," he communicated to my heart. "There are many who need to hear what you've seen, many who need to understand the choice they face between love and isolation." I didn't want to leave. How could I? I was in the presence of perfect love, perfect peace, perfect understanding. The thought of returning to the limitations of earthly life felt almost unbearable. But as Jesus showed me more visions of my family and the people I could help, I began to understand. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning, a commission, a sacred trust. The return to my body wasn't gentle like my departure had been. It felt like being squeezed through a narrow tunnel, every sensation intensifying as I got closer to the physical realm. The first thing I became aware of was pain, so much pain. After experiencing the freedom and lightness of the spiritual realm, being confined to a broken body was almost suffocating. I remember the moment my consciousness fully returned to my body. The hospital room came into focus slowly, first the rhythmic beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell, and finally, the pressure of Mark's hand holding mine. I tried to speak, but couldn't because of the breathing tube. But I could squeeze his hand, and I'll never forget the look of joy and relief that flooded his face when he felt my response. The doctors were amazed by my recovery. They had told my family to prepare for the worst. Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, and brain swelling had made my survival unlikely. Yet here I was, not only alive but fully conscious and aware. The medical staff called it a miracle, and while they were right, they had no idea of the true miracle I had experienced. Recovery was challenging, both physically and emotionally. How do you return to normal life after experiencing heaven? How do you engage in everyday conversations when you've spoken with Jesus? The physical pain was intense, but it was the spiritual adjustment that proved most challenging. I felt like a foreigner in my own world, seeing everything through new eyes. Simple things became profound. When I looked at my children, I didn't just see their physical forms, I saw the eternal souls within them, precious beyond measure. When I returned to teaching, I saw each student as a unique creation of God, carrying endless potential within them. Even the most challenging students became beautiful to me because I could see them as Jesus sees them. The hardest part was finding words to describe what I had experienced. How do you explain colors that don't exist on Earth? How do you describe music that isn't heard with ears? How do you convey the feeling of being embraced by pure love? Human language feels so inadequate for spiritual realities. But I knew I had to try. At first, I shared my experience only with my family and closest friends. Their reactions varied, some were skeptical, others were curious, and a few were profoundly moved. Mark, my husband, noticed the change in me immediately. "Your eyes are different," he told me one evening. "It's like you're seeing things the rest of us can't see." He was right. I was seeing things differently, and that new vision began to affect every aspect of my life. My teaching changed dramatically. While I still taught the required curriculum, I found ways to weave deeper truths into my lessons. When we discussed literature, I helped students see the spiritual themes of love, redemption, and choice that run through all great stories. My relationships changed too. Petty arguments and old grudges seemed meaningless in light of what I had seen. I reached out to estranged family members, forgave old hurts, and tried to share the unconditional love I had experienced with everyone I met. Some people didn't understand this change in me, and that was okay. I knew what I had experienced was real. Gradually, I began speaking at larger gatherings, church groups, support groups for people who had lost loved ones, and even medical conferences about near-death experiences. Each time I shared my story, I saw how it touched people in different ways. Some found comfort in knowing their departed loved ones were at peace. Others were challenged to reconsider their spiritual beliefs. Many were simply amazed by the reality of God's love. But the most profound changes were the quiet ones, the daily moments where I could share hope with someone who was hurting. I remember one student who was struggling with depression. After class one day, I shared a small part of my experience with her, about how precious each soul is to God. The look of hope that dawned in her eyes was worth more than any public speaking engagement. I've had some beautiful confirmations of the reality of what I experienced. Sometimes it's in dreams, where I briefly glimpse that heavenly light again. Other times it's in moments of prayer, where I feel that same complete love washing over me. And occasionally, I experience what I can only describe as thin places, moments where the veil between earth and heaven seems to become transparent, and I can sense the spiritual realm very near. One of the most remarkable ongoing experiences has been an enhanced sensitivity to spiritual realities. I can often sense when someone is hurting or in need of prayer. Sometimes I get clear impressions of how to help others, just as I did during my time in heaven. These aren't dramatic revelations, they're gentle nudges, quiet whispers guiding me to be in the right place at the right time to help someone in need. But living with this enhanced awareness isn't always easy. I see so much pain in the world now, so many people walking in darkness when light is available to them. I see souls making choices that lead them away from love, and it breaks my heart, just as I felt Jesus' heart breaking for those in the realm of shadows. Yet I also see incredible beauty, moments of grace, acts of kindness, seeds of faith beginning to grow. The greatest lesson I learned from my experience is that every moment matters. Every choice to love or not to love, to forgive or hold on to bitterness, to reach out or turn away, these choices shape not only our lives but our eternal destiny. Heaven and hell aren't just places we go after death, they're realities we begin to choose here and now. Today, 5 years after my near-death experience, I continue to share my story, but more importantly, I try to share the love I experienced. Sometimes that means simply sitting with someone who's grieving. Other times it means speaking hard truths with compassion. Always, it means pointing people toward the light and love I encountered. If there's one message I hope people take from my experience, it's this: you are profoundly loved. Not just in a general, abstract way, but personally, deeply, and completely. Every soul matters to God. Every life has purpose. Every moment is an opportunity to choose love, to move toward the light, to become more of who we're created to be. The door between heaven and earth isn't as solid as we think. Love flows through it constantly, touching our lives in ways we often fail to notice. My prayer is that by sharing my story, others might begin to see that love, to recognize it in their own lives, and to choose it every day.